We were sent to secure a village in the mountains of Mexico, but what we found there wasn't an enemy we could fight. It was something ancient, something beyond any war we'd ever known. The wailing, the cries, La Llorona was there, in the darkness, waiting for us. And that's when we realized this wasn't just a mission, it was a descent into something we couldn't escape. I was just a corporal, part of the 22nd Infantry, stationed out of the Southern Command in 1917. We'd been assigned to a series of operations during the Revolution. This was supposed to be just another job, another day on the line. The operation was called Operation Cielo Oscuro, and our objective was to move into the mountain village of El Dorado, root out any insurgents and keep the land secure. Simple enough, right? Our equipment was standard: rifles, ammunition, heavy packs. The usual. We were briefed in a cramped, dimly lit room, the map of the valley hanging in front of us. Our commander, Captain Reyes, kept it short, just a few notes on the enemy activity, a few reports on the terrain. Nothing unusual. We were given our orders and sent off without question, but there was something off, something I couldn't put my finger on. During the briefing, the captain mentioned something about the land, how the valley had a strange history. He didn't say much, but there was a brief pause when he mentioned the local legend. The interpreter, a local man who spoke Spanish and Nahuatl, whispered something to the captain. Reyes dismissed it quickly, telling him it was just superstition, but it stuck with me. The interpreter's eyes were wide, like he'd seen something we hadn't. I tried to brush it off. We all did. We were soldiers, after all. We were trained to fight, not to worry about ghost stories. But there was something about the way the captain's voice faltered that night, something about the unease in the room that we couldn't shake. The map didn't help either. One section of the valley was marked with a strange red X, like it was off limits. The captain didn't say anything about it, but the X stood out. No one else seemed to care, but I couldn't stop staring at it. It wasn't on any of our previous intel, and the villagers refused to talk about it. But that was only the beginning. We left the base just after dawn, the convoy rolling out in a slow, steady line across the rugged terrain. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched across the barren land. The usual chatter started up between the men, a mix of crude jokes and small talk, anything to pass the time. It felt like any other mission. We were on our way to a village that had seen its fair share of violence, nothing new. I remember one of the guys, Miller, cracking a joke about how we were going to be done with this mission by lunch, that we'd be back in the barracks drinking by nightfall. It felt like a regular patrol, nothing out of the ordinary. The land was silent, but that's normal for these parts. The war had torn everything apart, and most of the locals had fled or died from the plague. The ride was long, the dust in the air choking out any conversation after a while. By midday, we were approaching the village. The closer we got, the quieter it became. The usual sounds of a town, chickens clucking, dogs barking, children running, were absent. In their place was an eerie stillness. I remember looking out the window, trying to get a glimpse of life, but there was nothing. No movement, no signs of life. Just buildings, some of them half collapsed, others completely abandoned. We parked outside the village, and the silence settled over us like a thick fog. It felt wrong, not just because the place was empty, but because the air had a weight to it, like it was holding its breath. The sun was still out, but the village felt cold, too cold for the heat of the day. We unloaded the trucks, and the usual banter started again, lighthearted at first, but it didn't last long. The men noticed it too, the unnatural quiet. No animals, not even the usual flies around the open fields or in the houses. Nothing. I checked my gear more out of habit than necessity, but I couldn't shake the unease in my gut. Something was wrong, and I couldn't put my finger on it. Miller went ahead with a few other guys to check the perimeter. I stayed back looking at the empty houses. There was no sign of struggle, no broken windows or doors forced open. It was as if the people here had just vanished. But they hadn't gone far. There was a strange, unsettling stillness in the air that suggested they hadn't left on their own. As I moved deeper into the village, I noticed more strange details. The windows were tightly shut, and the doors were locked from the inside. I couldn't figure out why anyone would lock themselves in unless they were hiding, or something was keeping them in. The air felt thicker now, and my breath came a little faster as I moved past the main square. I glanced around, catching sight of the missing animals again. It wasn't just the quiet, it was the absence of life. That's when we reached the site and everything changed. We moved deeper into the village, trying to shake the unease that had settled over us. The silence was suffocating, and the longer we stayed, the more wrong it felt. The men were talking less now, their voices muffled by the oppressive stillness of the place. The sun was high in the sky, but it didn't feel warm. The air was heavy, cold even, like we had walked into some kind of shadow. I had to keep shaking my head, trying to push the feeling out of my mind. This wasn't anything supernatural, just a bad place, that's all. But then I saw it. The footprints. At first they looked like they belonged to someone moving in a hurry, but as I knelt down to look at them, I realized something was off. The prints were too deep, as if something massive had passed through. They were in the dirt near one of the houses, leading toward the forest. I looked around, checking with the others, but they didn't seem to notice. It was just me. I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was just the locals, or maybe animals had wandered through, but something didn't sit right. I tried to follow the trail, but it ended abruptly. No sign of return, no sign of what had made them. I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees, and turned to head back to the others. That's when the air shifted again. The temperature dropped. I could feel it in my bones, a cold that had no reason to be. I rubbed my arms, trying to warm up, but the chill was sharp and persistent. I looked over at Miller, who was adjusting his rifle, but he was shivering too. "Is it just me?" I asked, "or is it getting colder?" Miller just nodded without answering. The others didn't say much either, but we all felt it. The chill wasn't just a drop in temperature, it was like a weight pressing down on us. Then came the smell. It wasn't the usual stench of rot that comes with plague-infested areas. No, this was different. It was worse. It was a sickly sweet odor, decay, yes, but mixed with something far more foul. It burned the back of my throat, made my stomach churn. I glanced around at the others. No one said anything, but I saw it in their faces. They could smell it too. The air had thickened, and now it felt like something was clinging to us. Something we couldn't see but could feel all around us. We moved further into the village, each of us looking over our shoulders. It felt like we were being watched. The trees in the distance didn't sway, even though the wind was picking up. The birds were gone, and there wasn't even the sound of insects. It was as if the world had gone still, holding its breath. We pushed forward, trying to ignore the weight that seemed to bear down on us. That's when we found the symbols. They were carved into the stone walls of one of the houses. Old, worn, faded from time, but still clear enough to see. I couldn't read them, but they weren't anything I'd seen before. Not like anything the locals had carved or used in their rituals. The shapes were twisted, jagged, like something that had been scratched into the stone in desperation. I didn't know what they meant, but the feeling in my gut told me it wasn't good. And then there were the bones. We found them in the corner of the house, scattered like they'd been tossed aside. Some were still intact, but others were broken, crushed, the bones of children. Old, but fresh enough that I could still smell them. But that was just the beginning. We had moved through the village for what felt like hours, but the silence never left. The bones, the strange symbols, the missing animals, all of it weighed on us. I could see it in the eyes of my men. The constant glances at the trees, the nervous shifts, the way they kept their rifles close even though there was no enemy in sight. There was something about this place, something that made it feel wrong. Then came the first sound. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a knife. A wail. A woman's voice, distant but clear. It was high-pitched, a sorrowful cry that seemed to come from the very earth itself. At first, I thought it was just the wind, some natural noise that we hadn't noticed before. But when I looked at the others, I saw that they had heard it too. The interpreter's face went white. I didn't understand the words at first, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He muttered something under his breath, his eyes darting around like he was looking for something. "La Llorona," he whispered, almost to himself. "She is here." She is calling. ID heard the name before, of course. La Llorona, the weeping woman, the ghost that roams the land, crying for her lost children. But ID always thought it was a legend, a story to scare children. I didn't think it had anything to do with the mission. But now, with the echo of that cry hanging in the air, I wasn't so sure. "Did you hear that?" Miller asked, his voice tight. I nodded, but it wasn't just the cry that unnerved me. It was the way the whole village seemed to respond to it. The wind died down, the trees stood still. The air, which had felt heavy before, suddenly became suffocating. We kept moving, but I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I glanced at my rifle. It was still working, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The radios had started to cut out too, just static. Nothing but the harsh crackle of nothingness. I cursed under my breath, trying to get a signal, but it was pointless. We were cut off. Then came the real shock. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. A shadow. At first, I thought it was just another trick of the light, but it moved, fast. It darted across the path we were walking, disappearing into the trees before anyone could react. I stopped, raising my hand. "Did you see that?" Everyone froze, but no one said anything. They had all seen it too. The interpreter was the first to break the silence. "She is here," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "La Llorona, she walks with us." I looked at him, unsure if he was losing it, but his eyes were wide, his face pale. He wasn't joking. He was terrified. And in that moment, I knew it wasn't just the fear of combat that was getting to him. This was something else, something he had no control over. The air shifted again, colder now, the temperature dropping faster than it should have. I could see my breath. The others were shivering, but I didn't know if it was the cold or the fear. The whispers of the past, the ghosts of the land, were becoming real. I raised my rifle, scanning the trees, but nothing moved. Nothing but the shadows. And that's when the real shock came, when we realized this wasn't just another mission anymore. We didn't realize it at first, but we were being led into a trap laid by something far older and far more dangerous than anything we could have imagined. The further we moved into the village, the more intense the air grew. The sounds, the whispering, the crying, were louder now. It was as though the land itself was speaking to us, urging us to turn back. But we didn't. We pressed on, because that's what we were trained to do. But in that moment, I knew that we had crossed a line we couldn't come back from. It wasn't until the first figure appeared that everything changed. It came from the tree line just outside the village, and for a moment, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The woman stood still, just beyond the shadows, her figure barely visible at first, but the more I looked, the more she became clear. A tall, thin figure, dressed in a tattered white dress. Her hair hung over her face, obscuring her features, and she stood there, motionless, just watching us. The air grew colder still, and the cries, the wailing, intensified. I felt my breath catch in my throat, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was like a weight had settled on my chest. The other soldiers had noticed her too. I could hear their voices drop into tense murmurs, but no one spoke. The figure didn't move. She just stood there, staring at us. I didn't know what to do. My rifle felt heavy in my hands, useless against whatever this thing was. It wasn't just a woman. I could feel it in the air. This was something else. Something supernatural. I knew it deep down, even if I didn't want to admit it. "Is this what you've been hearing?" Miller whispered, his voice shaky. His grip on his rifle tightened, but his eyes were wide with fear. He wasn't sure what he was looking at, but he knew it wasn't something we could fight. I wasn't sure either. But before anyone could react, the woman moved. Her head snapped up, her face suddenly visible. Or rather, it wasn't visible, it was a void. A dark, gaping hole in the shape of a face. Her eyes were empty, hollow. The blackest black, deep and endless. And when she screamed, the sound was so deafening, so shrill, it felt like it pierced my soul. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. The sound filled my ears, and I swear it rattled my bones. It was a scream of pure grief, pure rage. A cry that had been echoing through the land for centuries, a wail that never stopped. I raised my rifle instinctively, but my hands shook so badly that I couldn't aim. I pulled the trigger anyway, but the bullets just passed through her. She didn't even flinch. She didn't move. She didn't need to. It was like she wasn't even there, like the bullets were passing through nothingness. The others opened fire, but it was just as useless. The woman, La Llorona, kept her eyes fixed on us, and the ground beneath us trembled. Then came the others. At first, they appeared out of the shadows, ghostly figures limping forward, their bodies barely visible in the darkness. These weren't human anymore. They had the same hollow eyes, the same spectral faces. And they weren't just walking. They were moving with purpose, as if they had been waiting for us. Their bodies were covered in rags, their limbs twisted and unnatural angles, and they attacked without hesitation. They didn't need weapons. They didn't need anything but their cursed existence. The first soldier was taken before he could react. One of them grabbed him by the neck, pulling him off his feet with terrifying strength. The man struggled, but it was pointless. I saw his face twist in terror as he was dragged into the darkness, his screams swallowed by the wail of La Llorona. "Fall back!" I screamed, but no one moved. We were paralyzed with fear. We had no idea how to fight these things. They weren't men. They weren't even alive. They were spirits, manifestations of grief, of death, of something far older than war. We were surrounded, and every direction seemed to lead straight into them. The wailing grew louder, more intense. The ghostly figures closed in. They moved faster now, their bony fingers reaching for us. I raised my rifle, shooting point blank at one of them, but it just kept coming. It wasn't alive. It couldn't be killed. And yet, it attacked like it was alive, clawing, dragging, tearing. The men started to break. Some of them fell back, others were dragged into the darkness, but there was no safe place, no escape. We were being consumed by something we couldn't see, something we couldn't stop. And that's when everything changed. The order to retreat came like a shot in the dark, but it was the only choice we had left. We had no other option. The battlefield had shifted from tactical to supernatural. The creatures, those things, were overwhelming us. The fear wasn't just physical anymore. It was in our minds, in our souls. They didn't need to fight us with weapons. The sheer force of their presence was enough to shatter any hope we had left. I screamed into the radio, telling the squad to fall back, but the static on the line was deafening. It was as if something was blocking the signal. The wailing of La Llorona drowned out everything else, pressing down on us like a physical force. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breathing ragged. I felt like I was choking, like the air itself had been replaced with something heavier, colder. We turned and ran, but it wasn't like any retreat I'd ever done before. The ground beneath us seemed to shift, the very earth feeling like it was swallowing us whole. The jungle around us was dense, the trees dark and menacing. We pushed through, rifles up, shooting at anything that moved. But it was pointless. The shadows, those things, kept coming, faster than we could run. A few of the men opened fire, but their shots went wide, their bullets tearing into the trees, into the ground, into the very air itself. It was like we were shooting at ghosts. It was like shooting at smoke. There were no clear targets, just shadowy figures wailing, clawing their way toward us. I saw Miller try to break through a patch of dense underbrush, only for one of them to grab him by the arm, pulling him into the darkness. I watched in horror as his screams were cut short, swallowed up by the wail of La Llorona. "Keep moving," I yelled, but my voice cracked. Fear had taken over. My legs felt like they weighed 100 pounds. Every step was a struggle. But we kept running. Some of us, others were too slow. Some of the men were dragged away, their screams echoing in the night, never reaching us. The rest of us made it to the extraction point. Just a small clearing by the river, barely big enough for the helicopter to land. We huddled there, breathless, covered in dirt and sweat, waiting for rescue. But I could feel it, the presence of them, still watching, still following. I watched as the helicopter came in low, its blades whipping up the air, sending dust and debris flying. We scrambled, trying to get on board, but even as we climbed into the chopper, I could still hear the wailing. It was like it was in my head. I could feel it rattling my skull, shaking my body. I looked around at the faces of the survivors. Their eyes were wide, their faces pale. No one spoke. We didn't have to. We all knew what had happened. Back at the base, I don't think anyone believed us. They couldn't. How do you explain something like that? How do you tell a commander that your squad was taken by ghosts, that the land itself had turned against you? The injuries we took were physical, sure. Broken arms, burns from the fire, gashes from the underbrush. But the real damage? That was in our heads. The trauma was everywhere. I remember looking around the barracks, seeing the men who had made it back, but they weren't the same. Their eyes were hollow. Their minds were shattered. We couldn't even talk about it. We weren't allowed to. I remember our commanding officer, Captain Reyes, he couldn't look us in the eye. He kept asking for reports, asking for something to explain what we'd seen. But we had nothing. Nothing to show him. Nothing to prove we hadn't gone insane. The higher-ups shut the operation down quickly. Files were sealed. Our reports were erased. Our testimonies classified. No one spoke about La Llorona or what happened in that village ever again. It was as if they were trying to pretend it never happened. But we all knew. We knew what we saw, and worse, we knew it was still out there, still waiting. But what happened next took things to another level. I tried to move on, burying it like they told us to. But some things you can't forget, no matter how hard you try. It wasn't the battle, the injuries, or the fighting. It was the presence, the eyes, the wailing. The land itself seemed to swallow us whole. I've fought enemies, but this was something else, something beyond anything a soldier could prepare for. The men we lost, they're still out there. I hear their screams sometimes, in my dreams, or maybe they're not dreams anymore. Whatever that thing was, it's still out there,